Welcome, listeners, to another My Mind MashUps deep dive where we unravel mysteries, spark curiosity, and make sense of complex ideas together.
Yeah, I am so excited to dig into this one today.
Me too. And, before we get into the actual data today, I want you, the listener, to take a second and just imagine something.
Okay, setting the scene.
Yeah. I want you to imagine trying your absolute hardest. I mean, maybe it's at a job where you're putting in, 60-hour weeks trying to get a project off the ground.
Oh, wow, yeah. Or maybe you're trying to navigate some massive, faceless bureaucracy to get a simple permit.
Right, or dealing with a health insurance claim that just keeps getting denied.
The worst.
Or maybe it's even a personal relationship you've been trying to fix for years, and you do everything right, you read the books, you put in the effort, you change your approach.
You do all the things you're supposed to do.
Exactly, and no matter what you do, the result is exactly the same. You just hit a brick wall over and over and over again. Until eventually, that burning desire to try, it just evaporates. You stop fighting.
It is a profoundly heavy state of being. And yet, it's a state that, honestly, almost everyone listening to this will experience at some point in some domain of their life.
Yeah, absolutely. And usually when we see someone in that state, someone who has just stopped trying, whose effort has completely evaporated, society slaps a very specific label on them.
What do they do?
We call them lazy. We say they lack drive, or they have a bad attitude, or, they just don't want it enough.
Which is such a damaging narrative.
It really is. But remember, every deep dive we do here is about three core things: sparking curiosity, challenging assumptions, and expanding understanding. So today's mission is to completely dismantle and challenge that assumption about laziness.
Because when we look at the actual biological and psychological data, the science tells a radically different story about what is happening to a person in that exact moment.
Right. So today we are pulling from a massive, highly comprehensive research master brief. It's titled The Mechanism of Learned Helplessness and the Path to Agency.
And it is packed with insights.
It really is. It completely reframes how we look at motivation, burnout, and just human behavior in general. Also, real quick, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe if you enjoy content that makes you think.
Yes, please do.
Okay, let's unpack this. What is actually happening inside our brains when we hit that metaphorical wall so many times that we just give up?
Well, to understand the mechanism, we actually need to look at the history of a concept called learned helplessness.
Okay.
It originated in experimental psychology back in the late 1960s. Researchers were studying how organisms react to aversive events.
Aversive meaning bad thing.
Yeah, essentially highly stressful, unpleasant situations. So they set up scenarios where one group of subjects could perform an action, like pressing a lever, to stop a really annoying noise.
Okay, so they had a way out.
Exactly. Another group was exposed to the exact same noise, but their lever did absolutely nothing.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they had zero control.
So one group has agency, and the other is just trapped with the stressor.
Precisely. Now, the critical part of the experiment came later.
Okay.
The researchers took both groups and put them into a brand new situation where escaping the noise was incredibly easy. All they had to do was step over a small barrier.
Just a little step.
Right. And the first group, the ones who had control before, they figured it out immediately and just stepped over.
Makes sense.
But the second group, the ones whose lever did nothing, they didn't even try to step over the barrier.
Wait, really? They just stayed there?
They just sat there and endured the noise.
Yeah.
So the researchers concluded that the brain had actively learned that actions and outcomes were completely disconnected.
It's like dealing with a broken vending machine.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah, if you walk up, you put your money in, you press the button, and nothing comes out. You might try a second time. But by the fifth time, you stop putting money in.
Right, because it's pointless.
Exactly. But the real tragedy of this lab experiment is that even when they moved the subjects to a perfectly working machine, they had already been trained to walk right past it.
Yeah.
They wouldn't even check to see if it was fixed.
Exactly. And what's fascinating here is how modern neuroscience has completely updated and refined this picture over the last 50 years.
Updated how?
So for decades, the scientific consensus was that the brain literally learned to be helpless, like it acquired a new skill of giving up.
Right.
But advanced neuroimaging has revealed that passivity isn't actually something the brain learns. Passivity and fear are the brain's default, unlearned responses to prolonged stress.
Wait, hold on. The default response, so we are actually wired to just give up.
In the presence of uncontrollable adversity, yes.
That is wild.
It really is. So deep inside the brainstem, there is a structure called the dorsal raphe nucleus.
The dorsal raphe nucleus, okay.
Yeah, you can think of it as like the brain's panic and fatigue center. When you experience a severe stressor, this area floods your system with serotonin.
Wait, serotonin, isn't that supposed to be the happy chemical?
That's the common misconception, yeah. But in this specific part of the brain, under severe stress, it floods the system in a way that actively inhibits movement and escape.
Oh, wow.
It literally physically shuts down your drive.
Well, why would our brains do that?
The biological calculation is actually pretty simple. If you are in a situation where you have absolutely no control, thrashing around and expending energy is a massive waste of metabolic resources.
Oh, so that's a survival thing.
Exactly. The brain forces you to conserve energy because it thinks fighting is useless.
So if the dorsal raphe nucleus is essentially slamming the brakes on our motivation to protect our energy, how do we ever do anything difficult? I mean, how do we ever persevere?
That is where the prefrontal cortex comes in.
Okay, the prefrontal cortex, that's the front part of the brain, right?
Yeah, it's the advanced executive part of your brain. And in this context, it acts like a highly sophisticated circuit breaker.
A circuit breaker, I like that.
Yeah. So when you are in a stressful situation, the prefrontal cortex is desperately scanning the environment for one specific thing control.
Just looking for any sign of control.
Right. If it detects that your actions are actually changing the outcome, like if it sees that pressing the lever stops the noise, it sends an inhibitory signal down to the brainstem.
Oh, so it talks back to the panic center.
Exactly. It flips the circuit breaker, shutting off the panic and fatigue center, and allows you to keep going.
Let me see if I'm visualizing this correctly. It's almost like having a biological GPS system that is constantly recalibrating based on road closures.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Like, as long as the GPS can find an alternate route, it tells the engine to keep driving. But if it detects that every single road within 50 miles is a dead end, it bypasses your desire to drive and just cuts the engine entirely so you don't run out of gas in the middle of nowhere.
That is an excellent conceptualization, yes.
Wow.
And the crucial takeaway from the updated neuroscience here is that you don't learn helplessness. Helplessness is the default state when the engine is cut.
So what do you learn?
What you actually have to learn is control. Your prefrontal cortex has to learn that your actions matter so it can tune the engine back on.
Okay, so if the brain is physically rewiring itself to shut down the engine in an uncontrollable lab setting, what happens when that lab is, a modern cubicle or a classroom?
Yeah, that's the big question.
Because most of us aren't dealing with physical barriers and annoying noises, but we are absolutely living in environments that function just like that broken lever.
We are surrounded by them. And this is where the research becomes incredibly urgent for our daily lives.
Right.
Think about the invisible training grounds we navigate every day. Let's say a student who studies for hours, but consistently fails because of an undiagnosed learning disability or maybe a highly chaotic classroom.
Yeah, that's out of their control.
Exactly. Their brain registers.
Yeah.
Action does not equal outcome. Cut the engine.
Or, think of a toxic corporate environment. You pour your soul into a quarter-long project, and then upper management arbitrarily shifts directions at the last minute.
Right, rendering your work completely useless.
Exactly. It feels pointless.
Yes. And the work stress literature in the sources, specifically drawing from organizations like NIOSH.
That's the National Institute for Occupational Safety and Health, right?
Exactly. They back this up powerfully. When they study the conditions that lead to severe occupational burnout and health deterioration, it isn't just about working long hours.
It's not just the volume of work.
No. The most toxic environments are defined by a specific matrix. High demand paired with low control.
High demand, low control. So you are expected to produce, to solve complex problems, to be constantly available.
Always on, yeah.
Right, but you have zero authority over how you do the work, what the timeline is, or even what the final outcome looks like.
And that combination creates an incredible allostatic load on the body.
Like a physical toll.
Yeah, it's a fast track to emotional exhaustion. The burnout isn't necessarily because the work itself is physically grueling. It's because the psychological reward feels totally random or intentionally withheld.
Man, that is so frustrating just to think about.
It is. You are running on a treadmill that randomly increases in speed and never actually takes you anywhere.
Yeah.
The prefrontal cortex searches for a sense of control to turn off the stress response, finds absolutely nothing, and the brainstem just floods you with fatigue.
So if this is resonating, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss the next deep dive. Because honestly, this framework explains so much about modern exhaustion.
It really does.
It's the futility of the effort, not just the volume of the work. So what does this all mean for the modern worker? Like, are the systems we interact with actually training us to accept defeat?
In many structural ways, yes. I mean, massive bureaucracies, hyper-managed corporate ladders, or even deeply unpredictable personal relationships, these are environments that sever the action-outcome loop.
They break the lever.
Exactly. But the truly insidious part of this mechanism is the neurological echo it leaves behind.
The echo? What do you mean?
Because the prefrontal cortex has learned that effort is futile, that neural pathway becomes the path of least resistance.
Oh, man. Which means you carry the training with you even if you escape.
Yes.
Like, you might finally quit that toxic job and get a new role with a highly supportive boss, but your brain is still operating on the learned assumption that your effort won't be recognized.
You self-sabotage.
Right, you self-sabotage because your brain is trying to protect you from an environment you aren't even in anymore.
Precisely. The training persists until a new reality is actively proven to the neural network.
Wait, we have to be careful here. I want to pause because I can easily see someone taking this concept of learned helplessness and completely weaponizing it.
Oh, absolutely.
Like, if we say that giving up is just a neural pathway, couldn't a terrible manager look at an underpaid, overworked employee and say, oh, you're just exhibiting learned helplessness, you need to change your mindset?
Right, blaming the victim.
Exactly. We can't just look at someone facing systemic poverty or battling clinical depression or dealing with structural discrimination and tell them that their lack of agency is just a failure to perceive control. That feels incredibly dismissive of actual concrete barriers.
This raises an important question, and it is a critical boundary line for this entire conversation.
Okay.
The sources are deeply explicit about this nuance. Learned helplessness is a powerful biological lens for understanding certain types of passivity, but it is absolutely not a moral verdict.
Right.
And it is not a substitute for acknowledging objective reality.
Okay, so we are not saying that everything is just in your head, and if you just utilize cognitive reappraisal, systemic barriers will magically vanish.
Not at all. That is the definition of toxic positivity.
Yeah.
Which is, mathematically speaking, just as disconnected from reality as total despair.
Yeah.
If a person is trapped in poverty, their lack of control is an objective, structural reality. It's not a psychological perception error.
It's real.
It's very real. If a person has clinical depression, there are neurochemical realities at play that require medical intervention. The concept of systemic locus of control teaches us that sometimes the levers we are pulling truly are disconnected from the machine.
Sometimes the vending machine isn't just broken in our minds, it's literally empty, or it's been bolted shut by someone else.
Exactly. Treating this often requires acknowledging those external realities first. People frequently need trauma therapy, medication, significantly safer environments, or broad systemic change alongside any personal effort they make.
You can't just positive think your way out of it.
No, you cannot out-mindset a fundamentally unsafe or broken system. The deep dive into this science should never be used to imply that marginalized people are failing, simply because they aren't, quote-unquote, trying hard enough to rewire their brains.
That distinction is so vital. We want to recognize that feeling stuck or exhausted is often a perfectly rational, protective response to an impossible situation.
Yes, exactly.
But let's look at the other side of the coin. For those who are in a position where the environment has improved, maybe they are in a new job or a safer relationship, or they do have a window of opportunity, but they find themselves paralyzed by that old neural training.
Right, the echo we talked about.
Exactly. How do we fix it? If our brains default to passivity, how do we actively build the pathways for agency?
Well, it starts by understanding what actually flips that circuit breaker in the prefrontal cortex. The opposite of helplessness isn't forced optimism.
It's not.
No. You don't stand in front of a difficult task and just scream affirmations at yourself in the mirror.
Oh, that's a relief.
The biological antidote to helplessness is experienced control.
Experienced control.
Yeah. Modern neuroscience, specifically the study of neuroplasticity, shows us that it is the actual lived experience of executing an action and seeing a result that buffers the brain against stress.
So you have to gather physical evidence to prove to your brain that its actions actually matter again.
Yes. The literature points heavily to a psychological framework called self-efficacy.
Self-efficacy.
This is a person's grounded belief in their own capability to organize and execute the actions required to manage a situation. It is an evidence-based belief system. And the way you build self-efficacy is incredibly specific.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because my instinct, and I think a lot of people's instinct when they feel behind or burned out, is to try and fix everything all at once.
Oh yeah, the grand overhaul.
Yeah. We think we need a massive overnight transformation to prove we have agency. But based on how the prefrontal cortex actually learns, that seems like a recipe for overwhelming the system again.
It absolutely is. It's a trap. If you set an impossibly large goal while you are in a state of learned helplessness, you will inevitably fail.
Which just proves the brain right.
Exactly. It just provides your brain with more evidence that effort is pointless. You have to rebuild the action-outcome loop, one microcircuit at a time. It requires actions with immediate, highly visible payoffs.
Okay, so what does that look like in practice? If someone is deeply paralyzed by burnout, how do they gather that evidence without triggering the panic center?
You shrink the scope of the problem until you find a domain you can absolutely dominate.
Okay.
If you are deeply burnt out at work, you don't try to overhaul the entire corporate culture on a Monday morning.
Right, that's way too big.
You might just focus on controlling the first 15 minutes of your day. You organize your immediate physical workspace. You answer one specific email. You water a plant on your desk.
Just tiny things?
Tiny things. You take an action, and you immediately see the result. The plant is watered, your desk is clean.
You are literally manufacturing a working lever for your prefrontal cortex to pull. You're showing the brain, hey, look, we did a thing and the environment responded.
Yes, and if we connect this to the bigger picture, the most protective move a person can make for their long-term agency is dividing their world truthfully.
Truth?
It involves an exercise of rigorously sorting your life into 3 distinct buckets. What is genuinely controllable, what is merely influenceable, and what must simply be accepted without surrendering your core identity.
Controllable, influenceable, and accepted. Wow, that requires a brutal level of honesty with yourself.
It really does. Because helplessness tricks you into putting everything into the accepted bucket. It tells you nothing is controllable, so why even try?
Right. And what about the other extreme?
Toxic positivity tricks you into putting everything into the controllable bucket, which just sets you up for failure when you inevitably hit those systemic walls we talked about.
Wow, that makes so much sense.
True. Resilient agency is living in the nuance. It's acknowledging the systemic constraints, accepting the things you truly cannot change right now, and fiercely claiming ownership over the small, real patches of ground where your actions actually do dictate the outcome.
So to summarize the ultimate truth we're pulling from these sources today, repeated exposure to uncontrollable defeat trains the brain into passivity. That is not a character flaw. It is a biological mechanism designed to conserve your energy when the world feels impossible. But beautifully, neuroplasticity allows us to rewrite that code.
It does.
Repeated, truthful wins train agency. The goal of understanding this mechanism isn't to shame someone who is feeling stuck. The goal is to give them the precise tools to begin breaking that loop, piece by piece, micro win by micro win.
Exactly. What was trained by the environment can be challenged by the individual. But healing that pattern takes repetition. It takes intentional environment design, and above all, it takes compassionate honesty with yourself about what levers are actually connected to the machine.
I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over today, stepping just slightly outside the brief. We've talked a lot about physical environments, lab settings, and workplaces, but think about the digital environments we inhabit every single day.
Oh, that's an interesting angle.
Right. If our brains are constantly evaluating the action-outcome loop to determine our agency, what does it mean that we spend hours a day swiping, scrolling, and clicking through algorithmic feeds where our actions have almost no tangible real-world outcome?
Wow.
Are the algorithms shaping our digital environments acting as the ultimate broken vending machines, quietly training our prefrontal cortex into passivity on a massive global scale?
That is a chilling thought.
It is. Like, comment, and subscribe to hear more My Mind MashUps deep dives. Find My Mind MashUps everywhere you listen: Amazon Music, Audible, Facebook, Pocket Casts, Spotify, TikTok, and YouTube. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your perspective could shape our next deep dive. See you next time.